Okay, why don't we get started for Tuesday here? It looks so nice and warm outside, doesn't it? Is it warm out? I still, is it getting a little warmer? Oh, okay. 40s I can handle. The last, oh, at least we didn't get too much snow. Oh, there. I remember, what was it, 2 years ago when in March we had like 50 inches of snow? I don't know what it would just snowed constantly in March and just drove me crazy. Uh, I always like this lab because, and I don't know if we don't see it as much anymore, but there used to always be a family of ducks that would, a mallard that would nest in the courtyard. Because if you look outside, this is a courtyard. It has walls on all four sides that got grass. And so a mallard would always fly in there and nest and raise its babies. And then the sisters would have to put out a little pool, a little wading pool, so the ducks had somewhere to splash eventually, and then they would open up the doors at some point and let the mallard walk out through Tower Hall and out there. So I haven't seen that. I haven't seen it in the courtyard. Although last year when I was here, um, I was leaving work around 4 o'clock, and there's a female mallard and again a whole a dozen babies, little ones, walking down by the science building, kind of trying to get down to the stream or getting lost. And they were headed, well, they were headed over to the Summers Park, like the wellness center. And I know they didn't want to go there. So I had to kind of, I and a couple of students kind of herded them down the hill to where the river actually was. So I don't know where they came from, but they were certainly around. So I always like this time of year, I start watching for the mallards to come back. So see. All right. So we're on unit 10 here. So last week we talked about virtual machines and VMs, and this week we're going to look at containers, which are smaller kind of versions or ways of running software in a virtual environment, kind of like that. And we'll contrast the two and look at containers here. I was just asking, I was trying to figure out in my mind, what's the time frame of VMs versus containers. And so I asked ChatGPT, because this is what I thought, yeah, that containers virtual machines have been around for like 20 years there and been gaining in popularity. Again, and it's really started growing in the early 2000s, so about 20 years ago there with some of this stuff. And they continue to grow today, the use of virtual machines. But Docker and containers have been in the last 10 years, certainly, and are, so they're a little bit behind there. But again, by 2020, 90% of organizations were using containers of some sort. 96% of everyone was using containers. So again, they haven't been around for that long, but they're very common now to use containers for things here. And we see a lot of places using these containers for lots of installations, and they're nice and small and portable kind of sort of stuff. So I'm going to go into readings. There's just one again. So since containers are kind of new, they're not covered in our old textbook at all there. So I mean, our textbook had a chapter on virtual machines or virtualization, but doesn't talk about containers. So instead, we're going to turn to this free online book from Microsoft. Again, it's from a company, but and it's selling their architecture, but that has some good material. So just be aware of where this is coming from. It has a little bit of a Microsoft bent to it. So this is the big book here. And you can look at the different sections over here. And this is the introduction to containers for this. You can read it online, but you can also download the PDF. I've actually downloaded the PDF, and that's what's linked right here, is a link to chapter 1. for it. And that's what I'm going to be looking at directly here, is this chapter 1 of it. Now, while I'm talking to you about containers, you should be doing the exercise down here. So go down to the exercise and pop open the directions for the exercise. And you want to start working on those. Again, part of it talks about this chapter 1 of this textbook, and you'll have to get a description of what Docker is and what is the difference between a virtual machine and a container for this. Now I wrote this, and again, you can certainly get it from this textbook. We'll also look at AI and see what AI says about some of these things also for this. And just so you know, there's also an activity this week. And again, we're doing any of the cloud services, Microsoft Azure, Amazon, AWS, or Google Cloud. All of them will support and run containers and have little tutorials on running containers. So you can do any of these tutorials, and they'll show you how that vendor works with containers in the cloud. Okay, so I'm going to go again to this chapter 1 of this text here. So we're going to look at containers and something to run the containers in, and we often call this Docker as the place where we're running the containers. So again, we're going to have different containers. Each container will have a different app in it, and then we'll run this in some software called the Docker host software. And each Docker host can run multiple containers for us here. So Docker, what is Docker? So Docker is an open source project for managing containers here. So it's an open source project. It's also a company that will sell services related to containers and stuff like that, and collaborate with other companies here. So we'll mainly be dealing with the open source project part of Docker for us. Docker containers can run anywhere. You can run them in the cloud. That's what we run them to. But you can also run them on different machines. They'll support different environments. So you can run a Windows app or a Linux app or a Mac OS app, often in a Docker container for this. So let's talk a little bit about running Docker containers. So on Windows here, we can run a Windows Docker container. So let's talk a little bit. Let's see if I have, I'm going to go down here first, explain here what the difference between a virtual machine and a Docker container is. And then we'll talk about how to run these different machines. So if you remember a virtual machine, we installed an operating system on our operating system. So we had our host, we had our hardware, we had our host operating system, in this case, like a Windows computer, and then we ran some sort of virtual machine coordinator, and we ran Oracle VirtualBox is what we ran. And then inside VirtualBox, we ran different operating systems. So if you remember, we ran VirtualBox and we installed like Raspberry Pi or Linux Lite. So these are full operating systems here. So just like here, this is the guest operating system, Linux Lite or Raspberry. And on top of that were all the libraries and then the apps for this that ran this. So we put the entire operating system on our computer. It would take often gigabytes of space to run these things. In fact, if I look at downloads and I look at that, although the download was only 2 gig, when I uncompressed it, it uncompressed to 10 gigs. So that's a huge file, a 10 gigabyte file, just to run this Raspberry and operating system. So virtual machines are cool, but again, they take a lot of space and a lot of resources because they run we simulate an entire computer's operating system on our computer here. So Docker puts these things in containers. So we have the libraries and all the settings we need to run this application. We have the application there. But we don't have the whole operating system. It runs on our host operating system. So it has to be an application that can run on our host operating system in some way directly, because we're not installing a whole guest operating system for this. But again, any libraries, any executables, anything we need to run that app will be included, as long as it runs on our operating system. So again, now to run Windows computers stuff on our host operating system, we need to be able to run, like if we want to, so if we're running a Windows container on our Windows machine, there's nothing wrong. It works perfectly fine because we can run any Windows app again. So it basically isolates all the settings and libraries and all the installed stuff for your application inside a little container. Now, if we want to run a Linux device or a container on Windows, that gets a little more complicated for that. Let's see if they cover that. Can't remember what they. Yeah. So if we want to run a Linux container here, we need to run something called the Windows subsystem WSL. Not seeing it there, so subsystem for Linux. So the Windows subsystem for Linux, also known as WSL, is libraries you can install, Linux libraries that you can install on your Windows machine. So it's not a whole operating system, it just supports a lot of the underneath tools that Linux needs for this. In the computer labs, the Windows subsystem for Linux is installed. If you're running this on your own computer, and if you want to run Linux containers, you would have to install this Windows subsystem for Linux here. So, gives you access to lots of like databases and stuff like that, a lot of stuff that runs in that because it has access to Linux tools like grep and sed and ops and stuff like that. So, okay, back. Well, how are we doing an exercise? So, okay, let's talk a little bit about, we talked about Docker versus the virtual machine. So virtual machine includes application required libraries and the full guest operating system. Container includes the application and its dependencies, but they share the operating system kernels for many containers. So again, doesn't include the operating system. And again, if we were to ask AI for this, I just ask AI what the difference is. It should give us a similar response here. Oops, it's searching the web. I should have turned off web search. So again, virtual machines emulate the entire physical computer, including its stuff. Each VM runs its own operating system on top of hypervisor here. So containers are virtualized at the OS level, sharing the host kernel or the host operating system. And they just isolate and run in their own kind of user space with their own libraries and stuff like that for this. So let's talk a little bit about Docker terminology that we all run here. So just like, well, it's virtual machines, we have a Docker, a container will have an image. This will be the deployment or stuff like that. They'll also have a little file, often called a Docker file, that will explain what's in the image and what's required for the image. So this is just a small text file you can actually add in how to set up that image for it. We build containers. So like in my software design class, it's an upper level programming class. We program things in C#, and we don't just necessarily create an application. We create a Docker container. So when we say compile and run, it actually compiles it into a container and then runs it from the container on our machines for it. And that's real common for more advanced systems, is that you'll compile everything down into a container and run that container. The students actually generally don't even know that it's doing that while I explain it to them. But you wouldn't know that it's running it and compiling into a container. It creates a Docker file for itself and creates a container, spins up the container. We just notice it because we have to. There's some software that we'll run in just a sec called Docker Desktop. We have to have that running for it to do. So again, you can build these containers like you compile an app here. And then we can have these containers are kind of, again, that image and often the Docker file kind of together is that instance of that. So let's talk about, well, let's see if we can go on to the next thing here. Maybe we should try to run an actual container so you can do it. So again, I ran VirtualBox. I'm going to close VirtualBox here. Because I don't need that. And we're gonna run Docker Desktop. There are two main sets of software for running Docker. Oops, I don't want that. So like we said, Docker Desktop is a tool. It runs on both Windows and Mac, and it's for managing our Docker images and running our Docker Desktop stuff. It kind of replaces this VirtualBox here and kind of is, but it runs Docker images and containers for this stuff. So that's what we're going to look at today. There's another version of this called Kubernetes that you can run also for this. And so again, we're running Docker Desktop. If you're running lots of containers, like if you're in a business and you're running lots of containers, you would use this Kubernetes to run it. You have to then buy it, and it's software for managing containers. So let's say you're running a company and you want to have web servers up at different spots around the world, because again, if you're running a company, you probably need web servers at different locations in the world so that your users can connect quickly to them. You often want to run back-end databases with those web servers and other containers. So maybe you're running, 30 different containers spread all over the world. If you're like that sort of setup, then you're going to be running Kubernetes, or one of the, a lot of the cloud services will have kind of a Kubernetes-like thing built into them. But if we're just running, 1, 2, maybe a half dozen images on our computer, we can use Docker Desktop for that. So let's run Docker desktop. So again, in the machines here, I can just go down and type in Docker desktop and run it. Let's see, I'm gonna close this so we can see. Okay, so it's going to ask if you accept the agreement. You can just say accept. You can just use the recommended settings. I think that'll run. We don't have it, yeah. Now, on these machines, you don't have administrative settings, so we can't have access to like the firewall. So at this point, you should be able to say no, and it should just still run fine. So again, it tried to run WLS update, and it didn't. Let's see, and I'm just closing that. So again, Windows subsystem for Linux, it was just trying to run an update on that there. And so we're not going to, it's still there. It just hasn't been updated there. Now, you can sign up for this, but again, you can continue without signing up. And so that's what I'm going to do is I'm going to continue without signing up to Docker Desktop here. I'm going to skip the survey there. Now I'm finally getting this. So you should be able to get this without signing in or being an administrator. Oops, what happened to it? And then again. I'm running this, and this time I'm switching this to advanced settings and saying I'm going to manually update WSL myself so that it doesn't bring that up. Let's see if that helps. Okay. So we want to get here where we have Docker Desktop running for this. Now, for our remote students, online students, you will have to install Docker Desktop. So if you go here, there's a Docker Desktop Personal for $0. You want to do that. Make sure you're installing that here. But you should be able to just go to the install, download Docker Desktop for this. So again, download it for Windows or Mac here and install it. So let's, I'll pause and let's see how we did as far as running. So we want to be running Docker Desktop here. So again, we're having problems with Docker Desktop closing. So we're going to try and see if we can do this, because these commands we're going to run directly here. So let's first see if we can download an image and see how that goes. So again, there's a bunch of pre-built Docker containers, just like there are pre-built virtual machines. These tend to be much smaller, but they're out here. So there's lots of different categories of things here that you can run for different architecture. So there's a place called Docker Hub that has these things. We're going to run a website, a small web server called Nginx. So Nginx is a small web server for this. Now, you can actually run operating systems in containers. It's not that common, but sometimes you can. And so you'll see things like Ubuntu is available here also. But there are lots of ones. Let's see, the most popular ones are things like the web server, BusyBox, Alpine, some of these things that'll run different, like this is the database server. This will run Python in its own container, Node.js, a development environment for graphics here. you can, and this is another database that you can run. So these are available. Now you can go to these. And if I go to this web server there'll be information about this web server and downloading it for us. And there'll be a command here to copy this web server down and install it for us here for it. You can also sometimes just download this, but again, generally you have to run this command to bring this right in the Docker here. So we're gonna try that here. So I'm gonna run and so let's see. So again, here's that same command, docker space pull space ngx here for this. So I'm going to try to run that. And again, it needs Docker running. So I'm wondering if Docker is still running in the background or not. So I'm going to run a command prompt. So open up a command prompt here. So again, if you go down in Windows and right click and just start typing CMD or COM, you'll bring up the command prompt window. I'll have that here. And then I'm going to try to take this command here and see if I can download this image. Make sure that was the same thing. So I'm gonna, it's giving me some error, so I'm gonna run this next command here and see if this will run on our machines here. Yeah, so I think the problem is I don't have Docker running because Docker keeps quitting. So I'm gonna try to run Docker again. I'm gonna go here, I'm gonna go here. Yeah, keep saying Docker image engine has stopped. I ran this up in my office thinking to make sure everything would work, but I forgot to come down to the lab here to see if something has changed. The idea is that when Docker is running correctly, you should be able to go to the command window and tell Docker to pull down this image, and it should do it. And then it'll show up in your images. But again, our Docker engine is just not running. Let me see if we can download this update and if that would help. Generally, we can't install updates because we're not an administrator here. Yeah. Okay. So we're not going to do this today. I'll move this to Thursday. And then I'll figure out where the error is between now and Thursday on this. So for part 2 here, you will just skip all of part 2. So if you want, you can just delete it, or you can just do like a strike through if you want, if that makes you feel good too. But we'll just skip all of part 2 for that. Okay, since that's not working, I'm just going to talk a little bit more from this chapter 1 about Docker. Usually we try it out and then I return here. So let's just talk about it. So there's what is called a registry. Again, we were looking at Docker Hub and we are downloading images. So we have these images that we have. Then we download one of these images to our machine, and then we'll run Docker Desktop for that. The symbol for Docker Desktop is this whale with containers. It's supposed to be like a container ship, but it's a whale with containers on it that runs containers there. So that's kind of the idea of this. Now, you can, rather than download the containers actually right on your machines and run it on machines, you can grab the containers and run them on a cloud here and set this up to work in the cloud. So they're talking about, you know, what you run on if you have to run things on premise, or you can run things in the cloud for this. A lot of companies will run things in the cloud. Some companies don't run things in the cloud for certain security reasons or stuff like that, or certain services they can't run in the cloud there. So often, like companies, some companies are not allowed to run like their let's say their banking information or their hospital client information. That has to be kept on premise. Sometimes there are some rules about for security reasons where this is. So sometimes you're going to be running these on site, and sometimes you're going to run these in the cloud. So part of your exercise is to go on to the next thing and pick one of these cloud providers and look at one of these services here that'll introduce them. So you can choose Google Cloud, you can choose Amazon, or you can choose Microsoft. They'll all have ways to run these services in the cloud for you. So pick one of these stuff and you can work through that today. So I'm just going to, so that's what this is showing that this runs. And again, they're talking, this is from Microsoft, they're talking about the Azure Container Registry, and then running these things in the cloud. And that's what this first one is going to talk to you about, the one from Microsoft Azure, talking about how you can set up and administer Docker containers for that. So I think since we can't do this other part, I'm just going to let you go through this. Now, I don't know if you can do the Google one. Google has certain requirements on here. And so I don't know if you can actually do this without, oh, I think it's all here. Yeah, it's all here. So I think I can view this all without signing in for this stuff. I'm not sure if I can run the commands. But again, you can choose any of these to do and work through one of these. And I think that's all we're doing. And Thursday, we'll have a lab. I'm going to move this stuff to Thursday's lab, and we'll do a couple other things with containers on Thursday for this. Okay? Sorry this didn't work out.